What's going on, YouTube? It's your boy Advice, and today I want to talk about my predictions for the early Gen 9 Scarlet and Violet meta. Now, you may know a couple weeks ago there was a Pokemon Showdown server created to allow Terastalization, and while it didn't have the brand new Gen 9 Pokemon because their stats hadn't been released yet, anything confirmed by leaks to be on the Gen 9 Scarlet and Violet roster was available in this server, so that allowed you to experiment with Terastalization and potential early meta for Scarlet and Violet. So the first team I created was this Zapdos Garchomp Disquake team. Now, I expected to see a lot of Torkoal and Sylveon. Sylveon has Pixelate boosted Hyper Voice. Gets a 1.2 boost from Pixelate alone. Gets Stab, and then you can Terastalize into Fairy. It's just doing a ton of damage with a strong spread move, especially if they're getting up Calm Minds. And then Eruption Torkoal I thought would be really heavily used as well. So I wanted to have Scizor to deal with the Sylveon and Tyranitar to deal with Torkoal. But the main point of this team was to come in and spam Discharge and Earthquake. Not many things can switch into it. And if you can spread Paralysis around, Tyranitar can come in the end game and spam Terra Rock boosted Rock Slides and get off huge damage. And, compounded with the Paralysis, that flinch chance makes it really difficult for the opponent to move. So this was a really strong team. Not many teams could deal with it. There are a few decent counters like Rotom. Any of the Rotom forms can Terastalize into pure electric typing. And that prevents them from getting paralyzed and having any super effective damage into them. I think Rotom Frost is a really good option if you want to try to make a Hail team. Rotom Frost can counter the Discharge Earthquake pretty well with Blizzards. And, I think this was a really strong team. You could see I was spamming Discharge in front of Volt Absorb Pachirisu, and it couldn't really do much because it just does so much damage to the partner that the support just really is not doing anything for it. So, definitely expect Discharge Earthquake to be really strong in the early meta, and you should take that into account when building your team. Another good counter besides Rotom is the Volt Absorb Thundurus form, because it doesn't get hit by Earthquake and it absorbs the Discharge to, heal itself back up. So, great option. Now, another thing I expect to see a lot of is Tailwind with Breloom. Breloom is a fast Spore user. It resists both electric and ground type, so a decent counter to the Discharge Earthquake combo. And with Tailwind support, you can invest in its bulk and its offense so that it's bulky enough to take Discharge and Earthquake comfortably, start putting things to sleep, picking apart that Discharge Earthquake team, and then immediately applying offensive pressure instead of having to switch into an offensive threat after getting a Spore off. So I expect to see a lot of Breloom. But yeah, there's a lot of strong Pokemon. Now you can see Terastal Rock Tyranitar I think is the best option. A lot of people were talking about Terra Ghost Tyranitar, but I like Terra Rock for the boosted Rock Slide damage, as well as maintaining your Spadef boost from the Sandstorm. So you could see just by getting rid of the 4x weakness to fighting by dumping the Dark typing allowed, with Intimidate obviously or something like Reflect, Tyranitar to survive, big stab close combat, and that can get you another attack off. Terra Rock Tyranitar I think is a great option. One thing I do recommend for this meta, because there's so many new Pokemon we don't know the damage calcs for, and you have to take into account Terastalization and, items and everything like that, it's really difficult to know your calcs. So having a screen setter on your team, I think, can be really helpful when trying to get comfortable with the early meta. People are doing damage calcs with their Pokemon, but a lot of times when people are calcing, they're not taking into account screens, so it can help, your Pokemon, especially the common Pokemon, survive attacks that the opponent has calculated to, one-hit KO or two-hit KO. Having that screen support can give you that bulk that is really useful when you're trying to figure out the meta. So definitely something I think is a great idea. Now, spoiler alert, Indeedee and Hatterene did lose Expanding Force, as did a lot of Pokemon. So the Psychic Surge Trick Room setup with Expanding Force spam is not going to be in the game. but I still think that Hatterene and Didi is an incredible Trick Room setup lead, a really successful Trick Room setup lead. And with that Follow Me and that Psychic terrain, basically the only way you can get to Hatterene is with spread moves. And people would try to use Rock Slide Flinch against Hatterene to stop Trick Room setup. That was a very common thing, but with the new Covert Cloak item, that prevents Rock Slide Flinch, and the other thing it prevents is Snarl drop. So Snarl was also a really useful method for dealing with Hatterene and Didi. And I think Covert Cloak preventing the Snarl special attack drop is going to make Hatterene a really strong Trick Room setter and, early sweeper. So definitely something to watch out for and have a counter for, even though they can't spam Expanding Force. Helping Hand, Dazzling Gleam can do a lot of damage, and Hatterene still has other psychic moves that aren't spread that will hit in the terrain. So with not being able to reduce Hatterene's special attack with Snarl or anything else because of Magic Bounce and not being able to flinch it, I think Hatterene and Didi will be a solid Trick Room lead that you should expect to see, and expect to see Covert Cloak on Hatterene. In theory, that's probably the best item for Hatterene, besides maybe like a Citrus Berry or a Bulky Berry. But just, paired with Magic Bounce, the fact that Hatterene will not be affected by, status moves or secondary effects, it's going to make Hatterene really difficult to deal with. Not being able to drop its special attack or prevent it from getting Trick Room up, it's going to make Hatterene and Didi a really oppressive lead that you should expect to see. And that's a situation where Light Screen is really good because, if you can't drop Hatterene's special attack and you don't have two spread Pokemon that can combine to one or KO it in one turn, Hatterene is going to get Trick Room up. So screens are a great way to, kind of prevent some of that damage and prevent yourself from getting swept in Trick Room. But definitely something to take into account. But yeah, there's just a lot of great options. I think the meta is going to be really interesting. I think, in an early meta like this, it is good to have options for reducing damage. So you can see it. I had really bulky Umbreon with Snarl, Inner Focus, and then Intimidate Gyarados, really good. Now, I think Terra Grass Gyarados is the best Gyarados. People just weren't expecting it. They thought their water types were safe in front of Gyarados, and I was getting a lot of KOs. And Gyarados did lose Power Whip in the new game. It's not a TM anymore, so Gyarados doesn't have access to Power Whip, which was one of its best moves. So that's frustrating, but Terra Blast still does significant damage. I picked up an Oko on a Rotom in one of these games, so that is an interesting idea, I'd say, because, Gyarados doesn't like to take electric attacks, and it also really likes being able to, take no damage from ground type moves, but this is a good compromise because grass typing allows it to take resisted damage from electric types while still taking resisted from ground. It's not weak to rock, and it does super effective damage to rock types, so I do think that Terra Grass Gyarados is a great option. It's just unfortunate it doesn't have Power Whip anymore, but Terra Blast does allow you to get around that. And the other thing I expect to see a lot of is like setup moves, Quiver Dance, Calm Mind, Dragon Dance, things like that, just because if you can get up a Dragon Dance or a Calm Mind and you can Terastalize into one of your original types, you're getting off huge damage. So the second team I made, this isn't it yet. I'm still using the Garchomp Zapdos team in this battle, but I played a lot of battles with this team and it was just wrecking everything. So definitely a difficult team to deal with, and something I expect in the early meta for sure. I'm going to skip out of this battle and try to find my team that I made the second team, and yeah, here it is. So this team, basically, I liked the Delphox. I wanted to have a better fairy resist on my team. I didn't really love Scizor. And I was using Psych up on this Delphox. Now, I noticed a lot of people using Quiver Dance and Calm Mind, so I thought having something that resisted Volcarona's moves and Sylveon's moves that could steal their boosts and get off big damage with Psyshock into Pokemon that had special defense set up was a really strong move. Now, unfortunately, Psych Up for the first time in many generations is not available as heavily. It wasn't a TM in Gen 8, but it was on a lot of movesets. But a lot of Pokemon don't get Psych Up anymore, and it's not a TM, so that's unfortunate because I thought this would be really strong, this set specifically. So that was unfortunate for my team building. I would have liked to be able to run Psych Up Delphox, but Sylveon is a Pokemon that does get Psych Up. Espeon gets it. There are some Psych Up options, so I think Psych Up is actually a great counterplay for a lot of these Pokemon that want to set up. So definitely something worth checking out. My little hidden tip of the day if you are watching my videos. Psych Up is going to be really strong, especially against things that want to set up Amnesia and Iron Defense. If you can have a type that resists Fighting type and can also set up and steal their setup rather, it can make it really difficult for them to get through you. So like Espeon with Psych Up could be really good against like the Fighting type Iron Defense Pokemon. A lot of people are terastalizing their things like Slowbro and Bronzong into Fighting type after they get set up to get Stab, Body Press, and that was pretty interesting. But yeah, have fun with it. I will recommend using a lot of damage mitigation early on. Like I said, Screens, Intimidate, Snarl. It definitely good moves to have early on. And that will help you withstand the onslaught of heavy damaging moves that you should expect to see. So yeah, I think Terastalization is going to be good, but it didn't seem overpowered. Like Pokemon were surviving Torkoal's Terra Eruption, so it didn't feel like it was too overpowered, and felt like you could deal with it. And I don't know, I really like the way this meta is shaping up. Obviously, it was only like a week that people were allowed to use this server, but it was good practice, and it was kind of fun to experiment with the Terastalization, and I think it'll be really cool, being able to build a team that's balanced. But it's really hard to make a team that's completely balanced, so you're always going to have weakness. Like this team that I made here, it's weak to Fairy. But you can counter that. My Grimmsnarl had Terra Steel. The main reason I initially turned Grimmsnarl to Terra Steel was because I noticed a lot of people were running Dragon Dance Dragapult, and I wanted to lead Grimmsnarl against it to set up Reflect, but its Dragon Darts was getting dual redirected into my partner Pokemon because Grimmsnarl is Fairy type. So I decided, let's give Grimmsnarl the Steel typing. It helps it take Steel moves and Poison moves that it doesn't want to take, but also stops it from redirecting Dragon Darts into my partner while also taking resisted damage from Dragon. So I thought Terra Steel Grimmsnarl was really good, especially because without solid speed investment, it's not outspeeding no speed investment Scizor. So Scizor Bullet Punch can KO Grimmsnarl before it can do anything. So I thought Terastalizing into a Steel type to take those Bullet Punches would be really good too. And my Umbreon has Poison typing as its Terastalization, and that allows it to take the Fighting type moves and Fairy type moves that it doesn't want to take. So it's really cool being able to, on your support Pokemon, use Terastalizations that kind of even out the weaknesses of your team and make it so that you're not so heavy on weaknesses. Because I thought this team was really good. It's just it did have a weakness to that Fairy type. But being able to use Terastalization and not bringing all those weaknesses really balance that out, and it can kind of turn into an advantage for you because, they're thinking, oh, I got to bring my fairy type against this team, have a lot of damage into it, and then I lead Delphox and Tyranitar, and I'm Terastalizing Tyranitar into a rock type, so it's not even taking the super effective damage from fairy, and then I'm psyching up their Calm Minds and their setup with Delphox, and now they expected to be facing against something that was obviously going to be fairy weak, and there's just no fairy weakness there. So Terastalization is really cool for that. It's just one thing I do recommend with Terastal is to save it. You don't necessarily need to use it every battle, and especially like in a best of 3 situation, if you can win the battle without using your Terastalization, it puts you at an upper hand position because your opponent doesn't know your terraforms. You can save it for a moment that you really need it to turn things around instead of blowing it early and giving up your secrets. So Terastalization is really cool, but it's not necessary. I noticed there were a lot of battles that I was playing in this meta that I didn't even Terra Evolve or Terraform. So you can definitely win without it, but it is a nice thing to have. Like here you can see turn 1, like I saw the triple axle coming, so I, instead of switching out Dragapult, was able to Terra Fire and get off a Dragon Dance. The triple axle did nothing, and then he's protecting in front of Dragapult because I'm set up, and he wanted to protect his Volcarona, but Dragapult can take advantage of protects by spamming Dragon Dart. So I think that Dragapult is a really strong Pokemon. Has a lot of great Terastalization options, Steel, Fire. It just really depends on what your team needs, and I think that's something that Terastalization provides that's really cool in this game, is that there's no definite, like with Dynamax, like certain Pokemon you wanted to have Airstream and their stab moves. So it was pretty easy to predict, like Dragapults in Dynamax were probably going to have max Airstream, max Phantasm, max Wormwind. But, in this, obviously Pokemon are going to have their stab moves, but you never know what that coverage move is. And now that you can Terastalize, the stab move can be literally any of 18 types. So pretty cool to have that option. Defensively and offensively. So yeah, that's my early takes on the meta. I expect to see Trick Room, set up with Hatterene and Didi, because Hatterene with a Covert Cloak is going to be really tough to get around and play around. And there's a lot of really good new Trick Room sweepers included in this game, like Ursaluna, Hariyama. The new Salt Rock Pokemon looks like it could be pretty strong in Trick Room. So there are definitely options. But yeah, expect to see Tailwind. Early metas tend to run a lot of Tailwind, and now there's Breloom to take advantage of that and spamming fast spores while also having really good damage output. So that and yeah, I think just building a defensive team is something that can help you out early on in the meta, just to be able to withstand a lot of different types of teams. But the other thing that you should really expect to see, like I mentioned earlier, was Discharge Earthquake. So that's my take on the early meta and things you can expect to see. And obviously that will shape up more as the game comes out and we see what the new Pokemon can do. But yeah. All right. Thank y'all for watching. Hope you had a great time. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.